Welcome to A Frame Apart, the podcast where every episode we compare two films, whether that comparison is obvious or not. I'm your host, Ariel Fisher.
And I'm your other host, Bob Barrow.
Welcome to the show, guys. This week, if you can't already tell, we're discussing our very first Westerns.
Ooh.
Ooh. And we decided that it was a perfect place to start by looking at the Dollars Trilogy, one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic, set of Western films in history.
Yeah, if you're gonna step away for if you look at sci-fi and there's your Star Wars, your Star Treks, and your everything else. You look at your action movies. There's your Schwarzeneggers, your Die Hards, and then everything else. Mm-hmm. With Westerns, you have there's
your John Waynes, your John Fords, and then your Sergio Leones.
Yeah, pretty much. So we have been debating, as we spoke of last week. For those that tuned into the episode last week, we talked about how this has been stumping us for a long time because we kept saying, let's do a Western. Mm-hmm. And we had way back when we had The Searchers plugged in for a while.
Which I detest.
But it got itself bumped
over and over again. And it almost got bumped. This almost got bumped again.
Yeah.
I'm sounding a little less like Kathleen Turner the later years today, but I have been sick, which is why the episode is coming to you a little bit later.
So you sound less like a house and more like a mystery writer.
Yeah. Exactly. More like Kathleen. I don't know why she's a New York Jew, but more like Kathleen Turner romancing the stone, a little less like Kathleen Turner as a house.
I'm such a monstrous house. Steve Buscemi, please keep those kids off my lawn. I have a tendency to eat them. Oh, they're so fattening, but it's just so tasty. Yeah, so we apologize for the tardiness of our turtle. No, the tardiness of this episode. But as Ariel said, she got a little under the weather, and she's about to start crushing some TIFF stuff, so
yes, sir,
she needs her
Bob.
bed rest.
That's you.
But
just an apology ahead of time. It seems that I really didn't want this to happen. Not only did I get sick and put off recording for a few days, but now either they're doing practice for the air show at the X, or the air show at the X is in the middle of happening. I'm not sure, but it's going to be loud, so we apologize.
Yeah. So you might hear a lot of unidentified whooshes and.
Like he said, Bob. He said earlier before we started recording, why couldn't we be doing Top Gun?
Yeah, that would have been so much better.
Perfect background noise.
Or, talk about Brian Griffin's famous piece of literature, Faster Than the Speed of Love. But, so, Westerns. We figured because I think we kept trying to overcomplicate it, as we have a tendency to do, especially when we start a genre. I remember when we did our first Noir-vember, we spazzed is what we're gonna do. Same with Women in Horror Month. It's like where the hell do you even start with a Western?
Well, we did pretty decent.
Yeah, we got there.
We did. We got there after planning and
discarding titles and what do we do, and let's just keep it simple. So if you're gonna keep it simple with Westerns, you have, like we said, there's two ways to look at it. You have the classic American Western, or you have the spaghetti Western. Mm-hmm. Those are pretty much your choices, because the genre is divided pretty evenly down the middle into that. I'm sure there's some other stuff, but if you're making a Western post John Ford or Sergio Leone, your feet are planted firmly in one of the two camps.
If not both. It's kind of, I find it usually winds up being a little bit of 1 foot in each. And especially when you get to something like, and I'd love it eventually to do some kind of a comparison between the 3:10 to Yuma's, like the original and the remake, and look at the remakes of certain Westerns and how they were redone with a modern lean. But even if you're looking at something like that, and I think that's a really interesting example, is somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, you even look at something like Eastwood's early Westerns that he did after this,
Unforgiven.
His early Westerns.
Oh, even
Unforgiven was his last one. You look at something like High Plains Drifter, especially has its 1 foot in John Ford country and 1 foot in Leone country, even up to something like Outlaw Josie Wales or Pale Rider is very much in both camps.
And here's something that needs to be said. When it comes to Westerns, it's not my forte. They're not something that I've really ever engaged with too much. My dad was always really into them, and I always... they were kind of always in the periphery for me. Mm-hmm. Certain ones were there. I think I had watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly a lot as a little kid, and then not again until I was a teenager. So some of it I had forgotten, and bits and pieces of Unforgiven. I'd seen a lot of John Wayne stuff when I was in university, and we were studying the Westerns because that's what we looked at, and clips of Unforgiven and things like that. But... Bob is the meat and potatoes of this one. He really, this is a genre that he knows incredibly well.
Well,
you do.
Let's not praise my penis too much here.
Ain't nothing to do with your penis, honey.
It's a Western. The whole thing's about cock.
Well, true.
Just for total clarity here, I did not watch a lot of Westerns as a kid. If I was going to watch an older film when I was a kid, it was usually with mom, so it was musicals or things like that. Obviously we watched this stuff in film school. I remember watching scenes from Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and stuff, and not really being too interested in it. The thematics of the West, I always found very fascinating. Tombstone has long been one of my favorite films. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the best modern Westerns to this day that they've made. But I got into Westerns after college. When I started really investing in Sergio Leone, I have a wonderful spaghetti Western box set. And that kind of became where I landed, is watching spaghetti Westerns. Mm-hmm. So I might sound like I know what I'm talking about a lot, but a lot of that is due to spaghetti Westerns and Martin Scorsese's wonderful documentary, Journey Through American Cinema.
Yeah, which is incredible.
Yeah, and it's all on YouTube, so go watch it. The Western component is fascinating because...
Every component's fascinating.
Well, the Western itself, before we get into it, it's a bit of a derided genre nowadays because it feels a little old and worn out. But it's important to remember that the Western... is one of the few quintessential, I'll say American, but you could also add North American art forms. I think it was Harlan Ellison that said, and Clint Eastwood both said, Americans have a tendency to poo-poo on their own art forms. And really, because if you look at any art, it originated around the world first before it came to North America, because we're such a baby country, or baby continent, I should say. Comparatively speaking to the rest of the world.
Yes.
Whereas you look at the quintessential American art forms, you can kind of boil it down to the comic book, the banjo, maybe jazz, and the Western. Mm-hmm. Everything else all the other film genres have their root in Europe. And you literally go back to one of the first long movies was The Great Train Robbery. Mm-hmm. And the Western has been around in American cinema almost since day one. Mm-hmm. So, and you have even them as a country, you have that mythology is so steeped in who they are that, the loner, the lone gunman, the person who handles themselves, and that, almost backwards Americanized a sense of chivalry is very much, the lone gunman, the lone cowboy is almost, you could say, the updated version of the knights, but like the original medieval knights. Mm-hmm. So you have, even trying to step into the Western genre, you have over 100 years of material to get through. I don't know if you could ever even watch all of them because they've been making them since pretty much
for so long.
Yeah.
And they do, when you think about it, the Western and that kind of concept does really expand into the silent film era. There's so many
huge amounts. But even before the silent film era, you had, even before film really took off, the biggest, other than vaudeville, some of the biggest shows to go and see were like Buffalo Bill's Traveling Sideshow. I want to say Calamity Jane, but I don't know.
Calamity Jane.
They would have their Wild West shows that they would take around, and it's funny that film because some of those at the very end were filmed on the early cameras. But it's, film was kind of the death of the old Wild West shows, but it was because the Western was created.
In a weird, well, not directly, but yes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting when you think about that, even in terms of oral traditions.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the fact that some of the earliest, well, not some of the earliest vaudeville shows, but a lot of the earlier American vaudeville shows and things like that, and little off Broadway, whatever the hell
American
you want to call
theater.
them, they were these kind of reiterations of contemporary American, I use air quotes, heroes or anti-heroes with, Buffalo Bill and Calamity Jane and all of those characters, that became kind of the American modern tradition to mimic the ancient Grecian, ancient Roman oral traditions of disseminating the stories of Greek heroes and Roman gods and all of those. And it was very much the American version of that.
Yes, and that iconography, like there are very few images that exactly what you're looking at by the silhouette. Spielberg actually talked about that. One of the things he loved about the purity of Indiana Jones is he didn't even need to show Indy. He could just throw the silhouette up on the wall and you knew what you were looking at. And he said that's the hallmark of perfect design.
Yeah.
There's the shot where Indy walks into Marion's bar in Raiders and just his silhouette goes up on the wall. And we've only been watching Indy for about 20 minutes at this point.
But you know exactly who it is.
100%. And to this day, you throw his silhouette up. You know it's Indy.
Well, that's what they banked on when they did Kingdom of the Crystal Fuck Up, but not
to get into just to stay on target.
We've been there.
We've been there. I recognize that too. But the cowboy, is
the man with no name.
Yeah,
the John Wayne.
Yeah, the John Wayne, the whoever, the take your pick, the quintessential cowboy. You throw that silhouette up on the wall. And you know exactly what you're looking at. Little kids know what a cowboy is.
Yes.
Even though we don't have them anymore.
Yeah.
You have guys that wear cowboy hats, but really them as a thing don't exist anymore.
No, you don't have them. You don't have the men with no name anymore. You don't have the John Waynes anymore. It makes me think of that Paula Cole song. But you do. Like a Stetson today is not what it was in the 60s and 70s when you had the man with no name and when you had Sergio Leone.
Yes, but I just even mean in the world itself when you look at the roots of where this came from, the Old West.
Yeah.
We haven't had anything that they keep trying to do that in Texas, which is why they all get their boners for their gun carry laws because they still think they're all cowboys, but all they're doing is shooting people in restaurants. Which, funny enough, do your research. The West actually was not the violent place that everybody said it was. Tombstone actually had itself one of the lowest murder rates in the country at the time.
Really?
Yeah. The shooter at the OK Corral was one of the most violent things or if not the most violent thing that ever happened in the city of Tombstone. So it's funny. But
that's not just because of unreported things.
That's true. That's true. They had law there. They had everything was documented.
Yeah, but you gotta think. Well, I guess, and this is kind of
because we have the Western.
Yeah.
Because our view of the West is so steeped in John Wayne and John Ford and everyone drawing their guns on the instant and crooked lawmen and all this stuff. Because the mythology has become bigger.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you, airplane. The mythology has become bigger and more realistic than the reality of the West, which speaks to a great mythology. When you don't even know anymore what it's really like. Like even we're talking about the Greek gods 3,000, 4,000 years later.
Yeah.
And you go to Greek, it's like, there's no gods around.
Greece.
You
go to Greek.
You go Greek. And there's no gods there. But you get to the point what I'm saying. So after that little rambly do, we are going to jump right in to Yojimbo with guns.
Yojimbo with guns. A fistful of dollars. So, according to IMDb, a wandering gunfighter plays two rival families against each other in a town torn apart by greed, pride, and revenge.
Yes.
Of course, the film is directed by Sergio Leone, as all three of these films are. It was written by let's see, there's a bunch of credits here. So, the screenplay was written by Victor Andres Catena. Jaime Comas Gil, and Sergio Leone. There's a bunch of other names on here, but I'm not sure where they fall with rewrites.
It's hard to say with these because you had the original script that everybody was going from. The original Italian script that Leone and them would have written. And then you take that script is translated phonetically into English and it comes out awful.
Yeah.
So then you have them
more
kind of
native
saying
English
whatever.
speaking writers come in and
well no, you have everybody speaking their own language on set, and then Eastwood the only one speaking English in the movie because he was the only one on set that spoke English,
right?
Other than their Polish translator. Makes sense, right? Polish guy that spoke English and Italian. And so, but then you have the people that come in to write the dubbing script.
Yeah.
And then you have Eastwood, who has to track his own lines throughout the film, coming in to do his dubbing. So he's changing lines in the dub as well. So with a spaghetti Western, it's almost impossible to track who did what.
Yeah.
When it comes
especially
to the
an early one. And considering that this is technically the first one, it's considered the godfather of them. Even if it wasn't the first one, it's the...
Yeah, we'll get into that.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
So the film stars, of course, as we mentioned, Clint Eastwood. We also have Marianne Koch, Gian Maria Volonte, Wolfgang Luxsky. There's and Sigart Rupp. There's a lot of people in this film. So there's a lot of folks here.
There's a lot of cast in this cast.
Many of whom it was their first time, if I'm not mistaken. Like some of them were first time actors.
Well, you have because it's such a low budget affair, and make no bones about it, A Fistful of Dollars is a low budget film. I love the fact
the story about the tree.
Yeah, well, I love that back in the day, a $200,000 European film was low budget. Now, if somebody got $200,000 for an independent film, they'd be like, my budget's fucking huge! But, even back in the day, even in the 80s, that was still a low budget film.
Yeah.
Now it's a very high budget indie film. So, the roots of this film come out of, obviously, Leone himself, and growing up obsessed with the Western. Because Westerns kind of came later to Europe and were huge in Italy. And he was very obsessed with the idea of it and the iconography of the West. And Leone had only made, I think, 1 or 2 films before this. And I think it was The Colossus of Rhodes. So very much a sword and sandal kind of Italian film.
Yeah.
Very typical of what you'd think of Italian cinema at that time. Like, oh, look, they're making movies about the old days in Italy. Ta-da.
Ta-da.
So when it came to... He had actually went and saw, in Rome or somewhere, a screening of Yojimbo, Akira Kurosawa's film, and was sitting in there and was just, like, hit by a lightning bolt. He's like, this would make an incredible Western. We could do this as a Western. So he would go to the theater and sit there and write dialogue down.
Really?
Yeah, and write down scenes and transitions and stuff to get kind of the bones of what Yojimbo was about. Because it's not like you could just go now and, rent
Copy
the movie
a film
or whatever.
word for word?
Well, you can't just sit down now in your living room and watch the movie over and over again. Even back then, it's not like you could go and even rent the print.
Yeah.
It showed up and then it left.
Yeah.
So... that's how it started, and that's why if you notice the first third or so of A Fistful of Dollars is very much Yojimbo. It follows the structure, a lot of the shots are the same, but then it keeps the thematic structure, but it really then morphs out into its own film.
And if I'm not mistaken, there was actually a lawsuit by Toho against Sergio Leone and their production because of how blatantly it ripped it off. I'm pretty sure they won that, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not certain, but it wouldn't surprise me because but in Italy they have so many strange laws about their cinema. It's almost the Old West when it comes to Italian cinema. They have no laws about or
at least it used to be.
It used to be. I could make a movie and call it, Die Hard 2
in
Italy and release it in the theater as Die Hard 2, but it has nothing to do with it because they have no laws protecting stuff like that.
No, that was at least in the 70s, as we saw with something like Zombie. Yeah. After Night of the Living Dead.
Dawn of the Dead.
Was it Dawn of the Dead that Zombie was the sequel? Yeah, it was Dawn of the Dead that it was the sequel.
Because it was released as Zombie 2.
Right.
In Europe and Italy. So, I guess we should talk a little bit about the production and how this all came about. So there had been a handful of European Westerns, and it was actually, based on the research I've done, it was actually the Japanese that coined the term spaghetti Western, because the handful that had been made, the Japanese would call them, they're macaroni Westerns.
Really?
Yeah, because they're from Italy. So that's kind of where the term spaghetti Western came from. But at the time when Leone wanted to do this, you're getting money from all over the place. You're getting German money and Spanish money and Italian money and Greek money and French money. And that's how the European film system almost still works.
It came in from everywhere.
Yeah. So nobody wanted to do this movie. Nobody wanted to be in it because they knew that they needed some kind of an American star.
Yeah.
So,
especially in order to sell the idea of a Western, because it is, like we've said, it was an American art form. Yeah.
So not just to sell the idea of the Western, but to be able to sell it outside of Europe.
Literally.
Yeah. Because you had a ton of Westerns that were the Django movies. He is not, Franco Nero is not American. But he could semi-pass.
Yeah.
So obviously he went out to Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda turned him down.
Right.
He went out to Charles Bronson, James Coburn turned him down. Funny, all guys that he would end up working with later.
Yes.
Once he was established, went to, I'm not sure the gentleman's name on Gunsmoke, Rawhide, sorry, and he turned him down. But he said, "Hey,
I know this kid.
You should look at so and so," because Eastwood was playing a character on Rawhide who was very much mom and apple pie.
Yeah.
Kind of, it was a Western, but Rawhide was pretty soft.
Yeah.
And he was not...
Rawhide wasn't so raw.
No, he was not the... rope him down, Rawhide. He was not the Clint Eastwood we know today.
Yeah.
So they sent him the script, and Eastwood's like, well, it didn't look very good, but I'll spend a summer in Spain. I've never been to Spain.
Yeah.
And he brought a huge amount of the iconography of the Man with No Name with him. He brought the jeans... He brought the lambskin vest.
Well, all of it was his. It was his own, either his own clothing, or he was left to put the costume together.
Yeah, he didn't know what would be there waiting for him.
Yeah.
So he wanted to try to bring as much as he could.
Even down to the cigarettes.
Just the cigars, yes.
The black cigars, cigarillos, whatever you want to call them, because they're not quite cigars. They're too small for that. But they're kind of like cigarillos. They were his. He brought them. Like he tracked those down, I think, because he thought it made the perfect accent piece.
Because that's what he did. He kind of built the character from the ground up. And Eastwood's actually a staunch non-smoker. He's never smoked in his life.
What?
Yeah, but he thought that what's more, you have the
Wait
Western,
a minute. No way.
Yeah, total non-smoker. And apparently those cigars taste like shit. But he helps put you in the mood for the character.
Is that why he keeps spitting?
Yeah.
I mean, typically,
well, you
if you're
anyway.
You would. Well, because his spit is to get rid of the flecks of tobacco that you would get in your mouth.
Well, he's doing that, but he hated the taste of it, but it worked. It's like, well, anytime all those guys smoking on Mad Men, they're smoking fake cigarettes, and any Emmys they won, they deserve, because those things taste like death. So he brought that. He brought the jeans. He brought the vest. He brought the butt plates, or the grip plates, I should say.
Grip plates?
For the pistols.
Oh.
Those snakes.
Oh, yeah.
He brought those plates. They were from his guns on Rawhide, and he brought his gun belt from Rawhide. So when he showed up, the iconography of the character was pretty much in place. They gave him a gun. They gave him a .45 because it's in the script. And Leone brought the hat and the serape,
the poncho.
The poncho that he's wearing. That was
serape.
Whatever it's called. Is that not what it is?
It's a poncho.
Okay. What's a serape then?
I don't know.
That's a word.
Okay. You keep going. I'll search serape.
No, I'm not. I think it's a European thing. So from pretty much day one, it was Eastwood that dictated that, and I think it's something that helps because Any smart director will. Am I right? It's a serape.
A serape, a shawl or blanket worn
Boom.
As a cloak in Latin America.
Thank you.
So it's regionally semi not so kind of ish correct.
It's a spaghetti western. It's a serape.
It just sounds... Poncho sounds so much better.
So any smart director will work with their cast to build their wardrobe if they have the time and money to do it. Mm-hmm. Because then not only are you getting something that suits the actor well and the character well, you're also getting something they're comfortable in. Mm-hmm. Because if an actor's not comfortable, and you can tell in some movies that they're just wearing the costume and they're just kind of carrying it around. Yeah. But then you look at something like, Aragorn's costume in Lord of the Rings. He is so in that costume.
But especially in that kind, with that as a very specific example, he spent time specifically just doing mundane tasks in that costume to get comfortable. He went method.
Oh, yes. Obviously, there's a lot more time and energy, even though, to be fair,
he came in late.
He had a week to do that. But it's the same idea. You help build these pieces around the character because Eastwood doesn't say much. He speaks more in this film than he does in the rest of the films. True. But that outfit does a lot of speaking for him. Because you have the poncho, he's obviously hiding something. So he gets those wonderful moments of instead of throwing the duster back, which is very classic, you have him throwing the poncho back. Yes. So every time he does that, something's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
So
he's going to tell you a story, and then he's going to blow you away.
Well, yeah. So I think that probably leads us into... We can talk about the Leone style. Because this Western is considered, all three of them, a complete, almost ground-up reinvention. From the ground-up reinvention of the West that we knew before this film.
Because up until this point, what we'd had was like the work of John Ford and others like him, and we had stars like John Wayne, who, to be fair, was quite old. Like, he wasn't old. I say that and it sounds like, Ariel, shut up, you're a bitch. But he was older. He played this kind of patriarchal archetype of the West. And
well, yes, by this point the American Western had already gone through its own evolution. Starting from the happy-go-lucky stuff like Stagecoach.
I was just going to say Stagecoach.
You can track that evolution just through John Ford movies.
Yeah,
and you can see how the sheen
wore off.
Yeah,
all the way up to something like The Searchers.
Yeah, those are your perfect kind of markers. You look at Stagecoach and look at Searchers. Searchers was kind of the sun is down on the West.
Yeah.
In American cinema, the gloss is worn off. There are no heroes. Our heroes are villains, but it's still a very soft take on that. It was heavy for the time.
I wonder if we could trace back, and maybe that would be worth looking into to do an episode on like the origins of the anti-hero in cinema. Because it seems like John Wayne definitely got to play that a fair amount, and you got that in Westerns like that. Even with, Blondie and the other versions of the Man with No Name, who, let's face it, he has a name in all of the three films. He's a bit of an anti-hero himself. He's a hero, but he's morally a little bankrupt. He's got some shtick.
Well, I think that idea in and unto itself is its own show or its own series of books, because
that could go any which way.
Yeah, the concept of the anti-hero is so huge, because in The Searchers, John Wayne's the villain. He really is the villain.
It's interesting.
What he's doing is a bad thing. He's morally bankrupt in a huge way, to a point that you would see later explored more vividly in the spaghetti westerns. Mm-hmm. But you hit that kind of right on the head there with talking about even Eastwood's a bad guy. In the Leone West and in the spaghetti westerns, everyone's culpable. You have a world that is so much more nihilistic than the traditional Western, and especially in A Fistful of Dollars, where you have kind of this almost crucible of characters. Because I think that's something that's so wonderful about this film, is that you have this town, and then you almost have this kind of primordial landscape surrounding it.
Yes.
Where there is no escape. Well, they're going in circles around each other.
They are, and it's interesting because at the very beginning of A Fistful of Dollars, I loved there's the moment when he kills the three. Are they the brothers? At the beginning?
When he first comes into town?
Yeah.
Oh, they're three of the Baxter gang.
Yeah. And then the sheriff comes out ready to arrest him and hold him accountable.
Mr. Baxter himself, the head of the alcohol gang.
And has to fish for his badge.
Yeah.
It's not readily available, and he's asking him who he is, and it's like, wait, let me get that. I can hang on. And he's fumbling for it and clearly it's something that's gone into disuse and disrepair itself, let alone the position.
Yeah.
And it immediately we have the tone set for what he is facing. Eastwood's character.
Where are your morals in this world? Yes. And they're non-existent, because even with Leone Westerns, even your heroes are killers and swindlers. Mm-hmm. And it's a shifting idea about what your hero is, because the traditional Western hero was a traditional knight. Mm-hmm. It was the idea of a European knight. There was a chivalrous code, and they rode from town to town, and they did good.
They saved the day. They rescued the damsels. They righted the wrongs, and they fed the poor.
Yeah, they fought dragons. They stole, and they stopped wars, and they were the non-fuck-upable good guy. Yeah. They were Superman.
Exactly. Yes, Superman with a poncho, with a serape.
He just flipped his cape up over his head and look, I'm the ghost. But he ever does that, just hovers outside kids' windows with his cape over his head. Ooh, fuck you! Scoots away. No one will ever believe you.
Awesome.
But it's redefining what a hero, quote unquote, is, because yes, he's killing people and he's swindling and punching some dames and doing all that stuff, mm-hmm. but there is still he's stealing from bad guys.
Yeah,
it's very much kind of that Robin Hood.
I was just gonna
idea where he's doing wrong, but he's doing wrong
by the wrong people.
Yeah,
who are as a result the right people to do wrong by.
Yeah, so it kind of washes out, but it's the roots of...
Comes out in the wash, you mean?
It comes out in the wash. Washes it, what did I say?
It washes out.
It washes out. So the roots of the modern action hero very much kind of lie in Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, mm-hmm. or Joe in this one.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of an idea of something that was very much about to take off in just American society in general, is especially for men. It was this idea of you are mastering something. The hero in the Leone Western isn't the most noble. It isn't the most pure. It's the man who's best with his gun.
Yes.
It's the man
who's the quickest
fastest.
draw.
Yeah. And that's very much I want to say it's always quintessentially been kind of a male thing. You look at male musicians, especially like heavy metal musicians or whatever. It's that mastery of your instrument, and I have this tool, and I know exactly what to do with it, and that makes me. Yes, that makes me powerful.
Yeah.
Because
you know how to wield your dick. Therefore.
Yeah, pretty much. He can pull his dick out and get it emptied faster.
He can shoot his dick off way faster than the other guy.
Yeah.
The other dude just gets stage fright.
And that makes him the hero.
When you put it like that, it sounds so ridiculous.
It does. Well, the whole idea of the Western is rooted in such strange notions of hypermasculinity anyway.
Yeah.
That, and
false
Leone
sense of machismo.
would... Oh, yeah. Because it is that quintessential idea of the lone man who's out in this kind of wasteland landscape making good on his own wits and his own wiles, and he has a gun and he has a horse, and if I want to eat today, I have to be smarter and faster than everybody else.
It's interesting because framing it that way, Unforgiven feels like almost a fourth part to this.
Oh, very much so.
In a way. And it's like the perfect conclusion to that, where that hyper machismo of I can shoot fastest, I'm the fastest gun in the West, I'll whip out my dick and shoot you before you can shoot me kind of thing. it sounds like the wisdom. It feels like the wisdom of the man with no name, of Joe, of Blondie, who is able to kind of at the end of his life recognize where the significance truly lies in the definition of a man.
Oh, that's exactly why Eastwood made Unforgiven, because he wasn't going to do any more westerns.
Yeah.
After he made Pale Rider, and to be fair, Pale Rider wasn't very good, but yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's when you strip away all of this, pseudo thematics, the iconography of the West, strip all that away. What is this a character like the man with no name or Django or whatever left with at the end of his life? He's left with death.
Whether
because
his own or...
Yeah, that's what the character is. Now, obviously who he's playing in Unforgiven is a much more brutal version of the man with no name, because he doesn't go around shooting women and children. He goes around saving women and children. So I guess that's the other big moment in A Fistful of Dollars, because you have this very corrupt hero, but he has an almost biblical sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
Because, you're only...
No women, no children.
Yeah. But also how when what he chooses to save, because the lone woman in the film is the Madonna. She is the Mary, and Christ's sakes, the little kid's name is Jesus. Like, it's nothing is lost.
Way to go, Leone.
On that. But it's the religious thing, I think, is something important to talk about as well, because if we're dealing with iconography, Ariel, before the Leone Westerns, what would you say was the iconography of the traditional Western?
Before we had this moral...
Before we get into the Leone Western, if you think back to, the John Wayne movies, the classic American West.
It was white is right. It's very much so.
I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about iconography, like imagery.
The imagery, well, I'm thinking in terms of like the cowboys versus Indians kind of thing.
That's thematics. I'm talking about imagery.
But that's why I said white is right. That's what I was implying. That's what I was getting to. But in terms of imagery, very much Robin Hood with a duster, or Robin Hood with a Stetson.
Yeah, but
and
like
spurs and
Monument Valley. Stage coaches, the old saloon.
Which are still very prevalent here, but they're dirtier here.
They're dirtier here, but there's a big difference with some of the iconography and the thematic iconography that Leone brought in. And I think it comes from a very quintessential European and Italian perspective. And it's the introduction of religious iconography.
With Leone.
Into the Western, yes. Because when you think, what's more iconic now to think about in a Western than the old rundown church and hangman's nooses and all that kind of stuff? Like, the religious imagery didn't really exist in the Western before Leone brought it in.
Not in the same way.
No, it was used in a very American way. It sat over there and it was a symbol of purity.
Yes.
Whereas in the West, in Leone's West, even the churches are destroyed.
Yeah.
Even there is no place of...
There's no God here.
No, perfect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe the Leone West. There is no God. Mm-hmm. And because everything he flipped, right from the opening credits, that this isn't your dad's Western. With that kind of pop art, rotoscoped opening. There have been nothing like that. So it allows you to tiptoe into a world where your heroes are broken and God isn't home.
So why don't we move over into, because we've been talking a lot about A Fistful of Dollars. Let's spend a few dollars.
Bob's been talking a lot about A Fistful of Dollars.
Well, to be fair, I've been sick and you know more about these than I do. So just to clear the air on that one, folks, this is totally kosher. But we've held A Fistful of Dollars. Let's spend a few dollars more.
The titles.
See what I did there?
I did.
According to IMDb, for a few dollars more, is about two bounty hunters with the same intentions team up to track down a Western outlaw. The film, again, directed by Sergio Leone. This one, the writing credits seem a little bit more manageable. We have Luciano Vincenzoni, Sergio Leone, and Sergio Donati, Fernando de Leo, and Enzo de la Quila. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
De la Quifa?
De la Quila. De la Quila. Shush you. The film stars, again, we have Clint Eastwood, and who would join him in the next film, Lee Van Cleef.
Yes!
Who here is playing a good guy. Although, again, the term good guy in these westerns is relatively fluid. So we have Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, Gian Maria Volonte, who, if I'm not mistaken, was in the previous one.
He was the villain in the first one,
He was. Mario Brega, Luigi Pistilli, Aldo Sambrelli, and Klaus Kinski, which just tickled the crap out of me when I saw him as the Hunchback. As soon as I saw him in the movie, I'm like, that's motherfucking Klaus Kinski.
I'm looking at him, I'm like...
Well, I know that face.
He hasn't eaten any scenery yet, so I don't know if it's Klaus Kinski.
And then you see him again later and go, oh, yeah, there he goes. Okay. The second time you see him in the bar, it's like, there's the chewing.
That's a lot of cocaine under that hump.
Yeah.
He was a sick man.
Was he?
Klaus Kinski was a character. They don't make him like Klaus Kinski anymore.
No.
Yeah.
No. That face. Kind of looks like Vigo the Carpathian.
A little.
Yeah.
Bit.
Has a bit.
Which is funny because the guy that played Vigo is Spanish.
But
or he's Argentinian or something. He's from Latin America.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, for a few dollars more. Now, Bob, if I'm not mistaken, you kind of prefer this one?
Yes. For a few dollars more.
Of the three, though.
Of the three Leone Western. Well, no, there's 5 Leone Westerns, but of the Dollars Trilogy.
Yes.
For a few dollars more is and always has been my favorite of the 3. It is definitely kind of the oddball out of the film, of the 3 films. And it was the film that this is the film that kicked off the spaghetti Western boom.
Yeah.
In the same way that it wasn't so much Friday the 13th that kicked off the slasher boom. It was the success of Friday the 13th Part 2 that kicked off the boom. And this blew it up because by this point, because it's important to remember that Leone made these 3 films almost back to back. They were all released within 3 years, 64, 65, and 66, which is mental when you look at the scope of the films, and also his trajectory as a director is insane. But this film, when it was being made, a fistful of dollars had broke in America. And that was always kind of the hallowed, holy ground of hallowed ground. Could we break in the United States? Because there had been, like they've talked about and we've talked about, there had been a handful of spaghetti westerns made before, but they didn't break in the States. They didn't really play anywhere. By this time you had some of the earlier Godzilla pictures were playing over there, but nothing had really. Your films, if you were a foreign film, you didn't break.
Well, yeah, they were playing, and there's a big difference between whether or not something gets some theater time or whether or not it breaks. When it breaks, it makes waves.
Yeah, if you're playing at, half a dozen theaters on 42nd Street, you didn't break.
No.
You're just the lower part of a second bill at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And by the time A Fistful of Dollars broke in the States, they were making this already. So that also put Eastwood on the map.
Yes.
And that made him the face of Leone's spaghetti westerns.
Yes.
And the spaghetti western in general. That gave him that was, not only did that allow the newfangled version of what a western was to break, it allowed Eastwood to break in his career. That was when he made it.
Yeah.
Well, started to make it. Because let's face it, he's still going.
Yeah, that is when he started to take off. These were the launching pad. But, the spaghetti western was breaking when they were in production on this. And the following year, while they were shooting The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, something like 40 or 50 spaghetti westerns were in production or were in the process of being released. Because Italy, the Italian cinema has always kind of followed a very much boom and bust idea. And a film will come out that'll prove very popular, and the public becomes obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. And back then, when you weren't waiting on big CG productions or whatever, films came out a lot faster.
Oh, yeah.
So you had this glut of spaghetti westerns that went on for a good 10 years or so, and then kind of died. And then the next explosion that the Italian they had, an American film would play and be huge. As an example, Conan the Barbarian was huge in Italy.
Oh, okay.
And because it's a very European film.
But that's an American film that broke
big in Italy as opposed to the opposite. Huge there. So you have that brought about the explosion of the Italian sword and sandal movies. Barbarian Brothers, Deathstalker. The
Barbarian Brothers films were Italian?
That film is Italian. It's Ruggero Deodato made that movie.
Am I thinking of the wrong...
No, you're thinking of the big beefcake guys.
Really?
Yeah. Now that one, the others that they did, like the trucking movie and when they were babysitting and stuff. Yeah, that's American. Those are American films.
Flabbergasted by that. That's insane.
And then The Road Warrior came out, and you had all of the Wasteland movies.
Yeah.
2020 After the Fall of New York and Warriors of the Wasteland, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Italian cinemas always responded to those kind of boom and bust periods. So they were about to have their big Western boom. And it was a lot of that has to do with the success of A Fistful of Dollars, but you're getting a lot of the thematic points that they'd grab and run into the ground came out of For a Few Dollars More. The bounty hunters, fucking Lee Van Cleef. By this point in the United States, Lee Van Cleef, his career was kind of done. He had been working since like the 40s.
Yeah.
But he was always, the third bad guy from the left.
He'd never been kind of a title character.
No, never. He had never had his name over the title. He was the second or third to last name in the credits. He glared at people, said a few lines, and then usually got shot.
And it's such a shame, too, because he has such a face for villainy.
Well, he has such a face for villainy and such a face for...
stardom.
He has a face for the Leone West.
He looks to me, and it's funny, and tell me if you see this, but he's kind of like an evil twin Gary Cooper.
A little bit.
Or am I thinking of Cary Grant? An evil twin Cary Grant.
Yeah, I think if Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart had an evil baby.
Yes.
It's Lee Van Cleef.
Yes.
Oh Cary, the baby's staring at me again.
Don't make me laugh, I'll cough. I've been doing so well. Oh, God.
Lee, stop it.
Oh, shit.
No, Daddy.
But yeah.
So, I think for me, why this one stands out the most is he had a bigger budget. So the world becomes bigger.
Yeah.
Instantly. From that opening shot, that huge, it's just boom, huge landscape, a very small horse and rider. And then the gun comes in and kaboom.
Yeah.
So we've established now that the world is bigger, but also violence can reach out and grab you no matter where you are.
Yeah. Absolutely
nowhere is safe in the Leone West.
And the villain here is infinitely more vicious than we got in A Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah.
There's like just the whole arc with the watch.
Well, his whole trip is so much more different than the character in the first one. He's very much, it's the Godfather. I come from an evil family, and I'm the guy that does, I'm James Coburn or James Sonny, whatever.
James Caan.
James Caan. He's the James Caan of the family in the first Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah.
I go out and I do all the shooting, and I believe shooting does stuff, but it's business.
Yeah, it's not personal. It's business. Whereas here, it's interesting too because we're getting a fallibility that we didn't see before, and we saw it a little bit in Joe. It's Joe in the first one, right? Yeah, we saw it a little bit in Joe in A Fistful of Dollars, but here we're seeing it in the villain, in the bad guy. And there is that fallibility because he's clearly haunted by the things he's done wrong in the past, but he's not sympathetic. We don't feel bad for him. we kind of enjoy and relish in his self-torture and know that he deserves whatever end he comes to, and hopefully it's a bad one, because he has been a vicious, heinous, inhuman person.
Yeah.
And he deserves whatever's going to come to him.
Yeah.
And especially when we find out who Lee Van Cleef is, which I didn't know. That was a very pleasant surprise for me, is watching this film, because this was the first time I'd ever seen it. And it was the first time I'd ever seen A Fistful of Dollars either. I think I'd seen... Back to the Future is one of my ultimates. So obviously I've seen the scene with the breastplate 1,000 times.
Oh, Back to the Future 3, yeah.
But also in Back to the Future 2, when Biff's in the hot tub with the girls and he's watching that scene. And that's the scene that plays out. That's why he plays it out in the third one. And he does it himself because he's seen it, right? And he can't remember where, but it rings a bell. So that's where that connective tissue lies. So that for me has always obviously resonated. So it was really great getting to actually see it now this time. That was a trip. But otherwise, I had never seen them. It was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly that I had always seen. Mm-hmm. So it was really interesting getting to watch this play out here. And getting to see Lee Van Cleef play a good guy. That was fun.
Well, he would periodically do it.
Be a good guy?
Yeah, and because after this movie, Lee Van Cleef, and after the Good, the Bad, the Ugly, he became a huge star in Europe, and he made a ton of westerns. Outside of For a Few Dollars More, my favorite spaghetti westerns are the ones with Lee Van Cleef. Beyond the Law, Death Rides a Horse. Those are probably my two favorites, and it's awesome.
The names of some of these films are so great. They're so perfectly obvious in a delightful way, in the same way as you get some names for metal songs are like so perfectly obviously fitting that it just sinks.
Well, yes, Fucked with a Knife and I Come Blood are very quintessential metal songs. Cannibal Corpse songs.
Oh my god.
From the Chris Barnes era, the first era of the band. But yeah, well, they're so quintessentially Italian names. Yeah. They name their films delightfully. A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, Four Flies on Gray Velvet. There's Strip Nude for Your Killer, The House of Whipcord. Oh yeah, are these some of the B ones? Some Argento movies. Some
okay, that
stuff.
Explains it. Because I'm going, how do you know these? What are these? Where are these coming from? I don't understand.
They have some great titles. Well, Christ, Cannibal Holocaust. Like what? There's some very poetic, whatever titles.
I don't know why that one never occurs to me as a strange title. I love it so much that it just never... It's just like, oh yeah, Cannibal Holocaust. Cool. Whatever.
5 Dolls for an August Moon. I think it's a Bava film. Those long, awesome Giallo titles are some of those are just great.
Oh my God.
But I think just we keep pussyfooting around this. The reason I like this film the most is, one, your world's bigger because your budget's bigger. There's actually people in this film. Mm-hmm. Because in the first film, there's the two warring families, your bartender, your bell ringer, and your coffin maker. Mm-hmm.
I do love the get 3 coffins ready. Oops, sorry, I meant 4.
Yeah, that's who you have, and then Eastwood.
Yeah.
Whereas here, people live in this world. You're not in kind of this little hell landscape where only the guilty and a handful of innocents live. Mm-hmm. The first. It's very much Red Hill Valley's the first one. Yeah. If you notice the project that I've worked on there's a lot of Leone West in those, intentionally so.
Yes.
But this one, there's people. You walk into a saloon and there's people. You walk into a town and there's people. Mm-hmm. But there's also a much larger sense of playfulness with this film than there is in the other 3.
Yes.
You have the, kind of the very European body comedy. Body with a W, of the, the big busty hotelier and the little guy that runs the place, and kind of this comedy of bureaucrats, where he's he's taking the piss out of people like that. Mm-hmm. They've moved off the street. They've put their guns down. So now they're objects of mockery.
Yeah.
In the Leone world, because they have rescinded the right to defend themselves for greed. So they become caricatures, which is all that stuff's quite funny to me. So I like that. But then also you have this very early bromance / father-son.
Very father-son
idea.
There's this whole concept of him being kind of shown the ropes in a way. Like Eastwood's character, he knows what he's doing. And he definitely has... But he has a more youthful approach. The father-son dynamic, I think, is really apt because you have Lee Van Cleef, who's got the lived wisdom and the lived experience to be able to tell him what to do, what not to do, how to do it, what's the most successful option. Like, he knows there are certain scenes where Eastwood will have done something. Lee Van Cleef, like when Lee Van Cleef shoots him in the neck. And it's like, you're going back and you're the only one to survive and you don't even have a scratch. They're never going to believe it. You need something. And it looks like a double cross at first. And it's, what the hell are you doing? But there's also the knowledge that he wouldn't miss. If he wanted you dead at that range and he shot you in the neck, you'd be dead. Like, that was deliberate. That was very calculated. Mm-hmm. And he's showing him kind of these better ways to do things. And he's teaching him kind of these little tricks of the trade. And it's interesting to me that this is coming in this order, that this is technically the last in the trilogy.
Yeah, I was about to say that because you have, if you look at Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as a loose prequel, and then Fistful of Dollars, by the time we get here, I think it's because when you if you're just watching them in order, because obviously Eastwood's a different quote unquote character each time.
Yeah.
Even though he's not. That was actually kind of designed to get around a lawsuit that Leone had with his producers. Mm-hmm. That's why he pretended that the character is a different character in this one.
Which probably has something to do with the Yojimbo stuff.
No, it was the producer wanted more money, or what, he had more control over it. He had some control over the character. Okay. And Leone didn't want to work with him again because he didn't enjoy the experience, so he went off and made his own character.
And named him Enko.
Yeah. Even though he's wearing the exact same costume, he even has the brace on his hand.
Yep. I love that brace.
Well, I love Desperado, right?
Well,
If you look at, he's wearing the same thing in Desperado. And,
is he really?
Yeah.
How did I never notice that?
It's not the exact same thing, but it's a variation.
It's comparable.
Yeah.
Well, he's wearing he has the leather strap on his wrist.
Because he got shot in the hand in El Mariachi, so he's wearing in the same way that he got his hand broken in Fistful of Dollars. So anyway, he went off and made it, and the producer actually tried to sue, but the judge ruled that you're trying to claim ownership of iconography, and the ponchoed, cowboy hatted 6-shooter loner, that's mythology. You can't copyright that.
No, that's
which is funny because it's totally the same character. But if you look at this as the end of his 3-picture journey, he is much, I wouldn't say warmer, but I think there's more of a yearning for interaction. His loner time, his time in the desert, his time in hell has kind of passed. And
is wrapping up.
Yeah. And he's looking for some kind of a connection, or at least where his role will change. Mm-hmm. And if there was a hypothetical fourth Dollars film, he would be the Lee Van Cleef style character.
Well, in For a Few Dollars More.
Yes.
Which, to an extent, he kind of is in Unforgiven. If you consider,
there's
not
a
exactly,
bit,
but
him
there's
taking Billy the Kid under his wing. Yeah.
Well, yes, of him taking Billy the Kid under his wing, but there's this kind of imagery there of, because as we've discussed, if Unforgiven is in a way a fourth installment in the Dollars Trilogy, then it kind of is that he's become, it kind of fits that he would have become what Lee Van Cleef was in For a Few Dollars More.
Yeah.
That he's gone from, especially as in For a Few Dollars More, he's warming up a bit, he's finishing his time alone, and he's going off into the world kind of wanting to engage. And he does. And he has a life. And he does things. And we know about that from Unforgiven, that there's all this backstory about what his life was, and that eventually he retreated back within himself. And I really need to rewatch Unforgiven. It's so good. But that to me feels like natural connective tissue. And especially when you consider where he was in, or where he will be, as we'll talk about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This might actually be a perfect transition. He starts out, if we're to believe that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the prequel of the Dollars Trilogy, he starts out definitely like he'll partner up and whatever, but their business, it's all business. And he has no qualms severing ties.
And he,
or not severing nooses, as the case may be.
And leaving people to die, and a lot more morally corrupt, which I think leads perfectly into something like A Fistful of Dollars, where he wouldn't make that choice again, no matter what it cost him, because he knows what that kind of betrayal and that kind of moral compromise gets him. And it gets him almost dead a few times in that one. But just before we jump away, I like to point out the fact that I don't know if Europe knew how marijuana worked when they made this, because that's what the villain is smoking. He's smoking marijuana.
You're sure it's not opium?
No, I'm 100% positive. He's smoking marijuana. And because pot culture in Europe was never like pot culture in North America. Or, because this is the middle 60s, right? It's Haight-Ashbury, it's, American smoking pot, like, woo, man. Like the classic hippie era. And in Europe, they think pot is akin to acid in the way that he totally fucking flips out and like it gets all jumpy and jittery for it and everything. It's just a cute moment.
Because I was under the impression that what he was smoking was opium. Because at the time, if you think about it, based on the time, not the time that it was shot, but the time that it's set, opium makes much more sense.
It's marijuana. Really? It's been established and talked about and written about. It's marijuana that he's smoking.
Okay, then that makes so little sense. Because it definitely feels like opium.
Well, you don't smoke opium like that.
No, that's true. Yeah.
It's just if you smoke that much opium, you'd fucking die. Like it's not how opium works.
No.
But it is marijuana. And it's quite cute that they don't really know how it works. But I think we should talk about the directing first before we move on. Because you're seeing a director almost under a microscope, and the growth that he's going through is very, very noticeable, and his leaps and strides as a director, but also the thematic cues that he's inventing. Because you can look at most of Tarantino's work and see it all in the Dollars Trilogy, especially the early films, but you're getting the evolution of the face as landscape, and the close-up as just an important storytelling tool as the wide shot. And you're seeing the growth through these films of that, because there's no one in the background of American Western, like you said, white is right very much, but also very much white bread waspy dudes standing around with chin McHuge face, and everyone looked pretty and clean. No one looks pretty and clean in a Leone Western. No. He finds these fabulous, broken down, wonderful faces and just throws them right up in your fucking face. And that is going to evolve into Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which right off the hop, the second that fantastic credit sequence is done, gigantic landscape. Kaboom. Gigantic face. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so let's do the spiel. Let's do the spiel. Yeah.
So, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, according to IMDb, a bounty hunting scam joins okay, that's a strange decision for words. A bounty hunting scam joins two men in an uneasy alliance against a third in a race to find a fortune in gold buried in a remote cemetery. That's not proper sentence.
Nothing. I sentence you to grammar jail, dickhead.
A bounty hunting scam joins two men. No, that's what? Huh?
Not even close.
What? Stop it. Make it stop.
Stop it, Eddie.
Stop it.
Go home, IMDb, you're drunk.
So...
this is a scam to Lee Van Cleef. That man's not Mexican. He's Jewish.
Is he really?
Eli Wallach.
Oh, I thought you were saying Lee Van Cleef. Isn't
no.
I was like, what? I know Eli. His name's Eli. I know he's one of us. Okay. It's fine. So the film, directed by Sergio Leone, the story was by Luciano Vincenzoni and Sergio Leone. The screenplay by Agenor Incroci. I'm probably butchering that. Furio Scarpelli, Luciano Vincenzoni, and Sergio Leone. That's who worked on the screenplay. The cast, of course, Clint Eastwood, and in this film he's back as Blondie. Lee Van Cleef back again as Angel Eyes, or Sentenza. And we have Tuco, played by the one and only, the indomitable, the inimitable Eli Wallach. So there we are.
Yeah, it's a cast that's as iconic as the film itself. Mm-hmm. So you really can't futz around with this cast at all.
No, you cannot. Yeah. It's pretty fantastic. Now this is one that I was very familiar with, and I love this movie so much. You don't.
No, it's not my preferred of the bunch. Now, it's important that we mention that the version of this that we watched is the full, big, long, extended cut that's a part of the Sergio Leone anthology box set. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of extra scenes in this film.
It's the Dollars Trilogy specifically.
No, there's 4 movies in there. Docu-Sucker is the 4th one that's in there.
Oh, okay.
So, but it's not a Dollars film.
Okay.
So sometimes it's been released as A Fistful of Dynamite and Docu-Sucker. So,
I keep thinking to Suck You Ducker.
Yeah, or Once Upon a Time in the Revolution. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So it has a bunch of scenes that have been restored and
not very
unsuccessfully redubbed.
Well, they're beautifully okay. I say
they look great
unsuccessfully, but that's not true. They look stunning. They're so beautifully restored. But if you're getting Eli Wallach to do his own dubbing for scenes that he did when he was maybe at most 30, probably not even, and like you're getting somebody else. It's not even Clint Eastwood, but you're getting someone else. Impression. And I would love to find out who it is. I would laugh my ass off if it's like his son, because he looks like him, but it doesn't sound like him, and it just doesn't sound right, because you can tell that Tuco is older, that the voice is.
He sounds
older.
like an old man. He sounds like old Eli Wallach.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, he still sounds like the same human, but we're traveling through time, and that kind of it sounds a little funny.
Sounds a little off, but
sounds a little off.
So, the film itself. This is not my favorite, but this is the icon. In terms of the Western, there are very few film in any genre. We've talked about this before with the Romero zombie films and horror in general. There's very few films that occupy the top, the pantheon of any genre. Take your pick. Doesn't matter which one. You know, there's your Star Wars, your Star Treks, and everything else.
Like you said.
With Westerns, there's a handful of John Ford movies. You know, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, a couple others.
Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
That's what I said.
You said Sahara Madre.
Oh, either way. Thank you for the correction.
You're welcome.
And then there's The Good and the Bad and the Ugly. You know, the other films.
Well, then you get like Once Upon a Time. Well, yeah. I mean, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, and The Searchers, even Unforgiven now, kind of all stand
Searchers,
as
Stagecoach. There's a handful of them that sit on the top shelf.
Like the ultimates, the ones that, you know, even a kid would go, I've heard that before.
Yes, it's almost mythical in the fact that everybody's heard of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Most adults may not have seen it in 20 or 30 years. Mom tells the story and told it on the show about her and a friend going to see like a 8-hour marathon of spaghetti westerns when they were teenagers and just having their minds fried.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't take it.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
But even down to the score. Now, we haven't talked about the work, the music at all throughout these films yet. So we've got Ennio Morricone doing his brilliant work. And I mean, he's insanely prolific. It's funny when you look at some of the stuff that he's...
Hundreds of scores.
Like, it's insane. You think of someone like John Williams, and you think of... you take your pick of the big score guys. And Morricone dwarfs them in terms of volume.
Yeah, well, Morricone's... He's a blue collar guy. If you want to get paid, you gotta work. And he's part.
You better work, Hansi.
Because you're also working all over Europe, you have a lot more output to work with. So you also have smaller budgets, and there's a lot of Morricone stuff that's just work a day. Not all of it's brilliant.
True.
But
that's true of anyone.
Yeah, you have some. He could be doing a score a month.
Yeah.
And he gets brought in to do a score on some trash film, and he's given a little budget, and he's given a couple of weeks to do it, And then the next week you go to work on the next one and go to work. It's not like someone like John Williams that has, 6 months to do a score, which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure if Morricone had the time and the luxury, he would have loved to have done that.
But you think of the work that he's done in general, and you think of how iconic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is. The main score for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has become synonymous with the Western genre. Not even the spaghetti Western or the John Waynes or the Unforgivens. Mm-hmm. We're not looking generationally. When you think of a Western, you think of, ooh, wah, wah, wah. Like, this is terrible. We'll probably splice that in somewhere. But you think of the theme from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah. And the crazy thing is that that's not even the best part of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly score. I always forget the full title for it. I know
at the end, it's Ecstasy of Gold.
Ecstasy of Gold, right?
Yeah.
Which has to be hands down one of his single greatest accomplishments as a.
Well, I think that's
as a musician,
what
as
he'll
a composer.
Be remembered for. Like it's so huge that Metallica actually spent, I think, almost 20 plus years where that was their intro music.
Really?
You go to a Metallica show at a stadium with 50,000 people.
The air show knows that we're talking about something epic.
Yeah.
So they decided now was the time.
In most cases, you go to a show and there'll be music playing out in the audience. Then when it's the lights kind of come down, and some bands will have intro tracks that they've scored, or a guitar player will start playing or whatever. Mm-hmm. But Metallica, because they're in their own heads and unfortunately in reality are just so huge that they would play Ecstasy of Gold. And there's footage of them backstage, James and them singing it, like yelling the melodies, getting themselves, because they're like, there's nothing more epic than the showdown in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So what better way to get ready for a Metallica show than to listen to Ennio Morricone? Which
is hilarious, because that's not even the showdown. That's just him. That's Eli Wallach searching for the headstone. Ecstasy in Gold is when he comes up over the hill and sees the cemetery and is then running all the way through. And it's hilarious because even my dad, like a couple of weeks ago, he and my stepmom were in town, and they were looking for a distant relative of my stepmom had recently passed away. And so they wanted to go and find the headstone. So they were in a cemetery looking, and they'd been given very specific instructions as to where this thing was. And God help them, they could not find the headstone anywhere. And that was because the headstone didn't exist. They had like tiny little rocks on top of everything. But my dad's like, that scene in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly at the end where he's running through the cemetery trying to find it? That was me. I was reliving that. I was Eli Wallach, and I was desperately searching for the headstone. And I'm laughing because you can picture my dad doing this.
Yep.
And you can picture him playing Ecstasy in Gold in his head while he's doing it and just feeling super epic. Like, yep, this is my life. This is what I'm doing.
I expect it was bumped up a few beats per minute in your dad's head.
Oh, probably.
Because he runs a little bit hotter than some people.
Yeah, he moves a little faster.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, kind of the pinnacle for so many people.
Yeah, you can't get much bigger in scope, much bigger in scale. Mm-hmm. Everything about it is bigger. You have the landscapes are bigger, the faces are bigger, mm-hmm. the stakes are higher with what because Eastwood takes some nasty beatings in the other ones, mm-hmm. but his very Exodus march through the desert, very biblical.
Very biblical and
pretty
very
much
brutal.
Puts them right on the edge. Mm-hmm. And then you have the introduction of all the Civil War stuff that's happening.
Which I didn't realize it wasn't until you were watching parts of the making of and the special features and everything, and until you told me this, that Leone was a huge mm-hmm. Civil War buff and knew so much, and then he incorporated details that the producers and everybody were convinced were fake.
Yeah, the stuff, the cannon on the end of the train, the size of the forts, because when you
the
think
duster,
when you think about the Civil War, you generally, if for people that I don't know if they're even still teaching it in schools, what we learned about it, when you think about the American Civil War, you think about the battles in the East. You think about Gettysburg. You think about Atlanta. You think about very much the field, a couple thousand guys in blue pajamas lining up across from a couple thousand guys in gray pajamas and then lobbing shots at each other. But you think about it in very much an East Coast landscape. Mm-hmm. It's easy to forget that large battles of the Civil War were fought in Texas and Arizona and down in those areas. Your landscape's a little different because of who owned those places. It wasn't all America yet.
Yeah.
But to see that transplanted from the visage or from the landscape we're used to, it becomes so much more gritty and brutal. Like Civil War was an ugly ass war to begin with, thematically and visually, but you transplant it to this landscape of just this, and it really reduces it down to the stupidity of something, of any kind of a civil war, is you're fighting over a bridge. You know, the war is pretty much over.
Yeah.
But you're literally running at each other over a bridgehead that you could swim across.
Yeah.
Like that's, you know, it's a great little nod, and you can tell what Leone was always trying to be. The films were always smarter than they looked. And I think that's what separated Leone from the pack, is his films were smart. And if you don't think about that little nugget of information, his kind of, you know, his subtle condemnation of the American Civil War in that in his setup, it doesn't impact you. You don't lose anything in the film. But then you fact that you have Eastwood flat out say, you know, what a waste. And what is it that starts to kind of change his attitude about how he's dealing with people is coming on to the Civil War soldiers. He gives that one guy smoke and helps pull his jacket up on him. And that's when you start to see the first glimpses of the softening that would continue on in the other films.
Well, especially when you consider that Blondie in this, the man with no name, which is weird to me because he's not even blonde, is he's so hard in this. He's hard enough in this that he would partner with someone and you can trust him enough so long as you don't double cross him. But if you put him in a position where he has to make a decision, he's going to leave you hanging. He can miss. And that might be fine. Mm-hmm. That might be no skin off his back. And he would lose no sleep over it. But you're right, when you get this vantage point when he starts to engage with the Civil War in a real way, and not just because they kind of find it's so funny to me how they just kind of fall into it by happenstance, by a change of a dress, you know? Mm-hmm. And they kind of fall into this and then they find their way through it. And it's that waste of life, and it changes him. And that's also the perfect way to see how he transitions as a character through all three films, especially when you start to consider this as the prequel, which it's so hard to deny that it is.
Once you notice it, it's kind of hard to deal, because it's, well, flat out, you're dealing with, but in a few dollars more, you're dealing with the after the Civil War. They say the Civil War is over. Mm-hmm. You know, Van Cleef is an ex-Civil War general. You know, he has moved on and has been doing this bounty hunting thing for X number of years. Mm-hmm. You know, you have the guns are older. You know, you have him gathering pieces of his iconic costume. Well,
exactly. And if you don't focus on the rest of it, if you fail to recognize the dates on the tombstones in a Fistful of Dollars, and the fact that Lee Van Cleef is was a general in the Civil War,
or something,
that he was a higher up in the Civil War, any of those things, just watching the trajectory of how his costume changes.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because, to me, his attention to detail, Leone's attention to detail in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly kind of makes you wonder why he didn't include some of those details in A Fistful of Dollars or for a few dollars more. And the only thing I can come to is that it was an issue of time constraints and money. And when you consider that Clint Eastwood was in charge of putting together, basically, he was almost entirely in charge of putting together his costume in A Fistful of Dollars, and that it was the same character with a change of a name in For a Few Dollars More. He wasn't going to change the costume there, but if you're getting this and you're setting it earlier and you're giving Leone the opportunity to make the Civil War denouncement that he wanted to make and the Civil War film that he wanted to make, it makes perfect sense that he would take the time to kind of transition, and down to the inclusion of the duster. The way Eastwood looks at the beginning of the film is totally different than how he looks at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And he transitions into kind of this new generation. So it's almost even an ode to the the shift away from classic westerns into what Leone would do with A Fistful of Dollars.
He's riding off out of this sunset into the new dawn of the Leone West.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even it's so funny because there's this clip of his producer saying, "Why is he wearing that long trench coat? That doesn't make any sense. Why would any cowboys wear that?" And Leone opens his little book and shows him the picture, and sure enough, that's actually what they would wear a duster.
They'd be covered in dust all the time.
Yeah, so they'd be covering their bodies as much as possible. They'd want to have as much fabric as possible covering them. It also protects them from the sun and consequently the heat and the damage that'll do. So it just makes sense. And it's like, oh shit. These things that we don't think about. We think of, and especially because of the impact of A Fistful of Dollars, that poncho, or serape, as Bob likes to call it, is, has become...
I'm the only one.
I see.
Ooh, that's a good serape. Yeah, small joy. Don't cough.
Make me laugh.
Don't cough. She coughed, everybody.
Damn it. That became kind of this iconic imagery that, that's how we saw cowboys. It's the
iconic imagery of the New West.
Yes.
The Old West, is very much the more traditional cowboy hat, the duster, it's, canteens and all that kind of stuff. Like it's very much how you picture a Western.
Yeah.
But he slowly shifts it across the film. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was.
Now I really want to watch The Magnificent Seven, which I've never seen the original of. I've seen the remake, and it really makes me want to finish watching. What's it called? Deadwood.
Oh.
Damn it.
Sure.
Hey, you don't like it. I do. Whatever.
I just cannot take it seriously because of the language.
I know.
Sounds like it was. Everything else is fine. The performances are great. It looks wonderful, and I want to. I love that. When I was working on Red Hill Valley, I tried to watch it, but it sounds like it was written by a 5-year-old. And it's like they gave these amazing scripts to a they gave it to a 14-year-old boy sitting in his basement. And when his parents aren't around, he can say, fuck, fuck, fuckity, fuck, 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 all he wants. And they just butchered these scripts. I don't know how anyone watches that show with a straight face. I know, but I don't get it.
Honestly, the only person who's the easiest person to watch with all of the swearing is Ian McShane. Because he manages to, and it's not just his character. Ian McShane has to be one of the simultaneously most underrated and appreciated actors of his time.
Yeah, he's in that weird spot.
He's in that really weird spot where he's kind of underappreciated, but kind of just appreciated enough. He is so gifted, and he manages to pass off every over-the-top, unnecessary bundle of clusterfucks of swears as natural. And he does. He sells it, but he's the only one who sells it. Everybody else is doing their damnedest. But you're right. At some points, it's a bit much. But apparently it's not that, it kind of fits. Apparently it's not that unusual. I don't know. We don't have recordings from that time. Yeah. We don't have, any wax cylinders that were recorded. And I'm pretty sure if we did, they wouldn't be the most natural dialogue. It would probably be someone trying to sound professional.
No one walked into a Western saloon and said, "Could y'all hold still for a minute while I get my cylinders running?"
Yeah, exactly.
But no, this is the film that set the stage for, Quentin Tarantino's entire career is rooted in the Dollars Trilogy, but especially Good and the Bad, the Ugly. The way that Robert Rodriguez finished off the El Mariachi series with Once Upon a Time in the West is the entire structure is taken from this film.
Really?
Yeah. Well, if you think about, you have...
Well, I still haven't seen it.
Oh, I think that's one of the things that bugs me about this movie the most, and it's one of the things that bug me about... Well, there's a lot of things that bug me about Once Upon a Time in the West, or Once Upon a Time in Mexico. It's the fact that it stops being Eastwood's movie. And it's very much Eli Wallach's film. He's in a ton of it. Mm-hmm. He dominates every scene that he's in. And by the end of it, I feel like it's the same problem I had with Once Upon a Time in Mexico, as I felt like the mariachi was cameoing in his own sequel. And I feel that compared to the first two, Eastwood is kind of pushed to the sides in favor of especially Tuco, but even then Angel Eyes kind of drops out of the story for huge chunks.
Yeah, Angel Eyes is definitely the least represented of the three. I can see what you mean, but I think in this instance it works because for the first time we're really getting, not for the first time. For the second time, we're seeing the man with no name have a partner.
Yes, but they're balanced in Fistful and For a Few Dollars More. They're balanced and their relationship is important. I feel, at least for me personally, that's one of the things that bugs me about Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Is that now I like what Eli Wallach is hilarious. He's just chewing those scenes up and down.
Hey man, I mean, if you're gonna shoot, don't talk.
Yeah, but for me, I come to a Dollars movie and I want to watch Clint Eastwood doing Clint Eastwood Cowboy Leone stuff. And for me, he doesn't do much in this movie.
Well, I think the big difference between this and A Fistful of Dollars, or For a Few Dollars More, in terms of screen time, is that the majority of For a Few Dollars More is still from it's either from the villain's vantage point or it's from Eastwood's vantage point. You don't get a lot that's from Van Cleef's vantage point. And
you get some,
but not much. It's usually when they're together. You don't get a lot that's just from
after
his
that
vantage
opening
point.
Scene when they establish his level of badassery. Yes.
Yeah, but in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you're getting it's from Eastwood's vantage point and Tuco's vantage point.
Yeah.
It's from Blondie and Tuco's vantage point, and sometimes they're not together. Therefore, those vantage points are separate. So it does it severs that continuity as we're familiar with it. So you're not wrong in your acknowledgement of the fact that the screen time changes, the perspective changes, and all of these things. I think at that point it just comes down to a matter of preference.
Well, yeah, it comes down, do you enjoy the changes that Leone and do you enjoy what Leone's done with this or not? Mm-hmm. And personally, I don't. I think the movies...
I love this movie
I think
so
it's
much.
Way too long.
I will agree with you there. It could use a trim.
Yeah. I like the good, even the 2 hours and 20 minutes of A Few Dollars More is a little long in places.
It's a little long in the tooth.
I think 3+ hours is too much. Now we watched the longer version than has been traditionally released. But I don't know. To me, this one feels much more like an exercise. It's kind of look at all the things I can do. And I don't know. It's so different that it's not, I'm not saying any of this is a bad film. The Good and the Bad, the Ugly is still insanely brilliant, and its impact is still felt to this day in cinema.
Yeah.
It just doesn't speak to me the way the other two films do and other spaghetti westerns
Hey,
do.
man. Blade Runner and 2001 don't speak to me at all. So there's something to be said for just because it's considered iconic does not necessarily mean it's going to be appealing.
Yeah, and there's no... And I like the fact that... Well, I want people to have more of a change in the dialogue about that if you don't enjoy those films, you're very much... Because nerd culture has gone so toxic, you're an asshole. You're an idiot. You're a stupid person if you don't enjoy those films. No, you just don't enjoy them.
Yeah. Well, it's also our language around film, right? That there's so much, it's so difficult. And I think this is a big part of why so many of us, and specifically women involved in film criticism and things like this, find it difficult to kind of get a word in edgewise, is that the language around film is very possessive. And it's the experience around film is very personal. And as a result, we become possessive of that experience. Yeah. So when we're trying to discuss merit and quality as opposed to personal experience and enjoyment, the language, it's very difficult to teach the layperson why the difference in those languages, why the difference of that language is so important. But it is. And there is a very clear divide. Mm-hmm. It's why when you say, like, for instance, with The Godfather, when we did that, and you were saying, you were very careful. You weren't saying that you thought it was a bad movie. There were points where you said you thought it was boring, but you were very clear about your language and saying that it was a personal choice, that you didn't enjoy it. It didn't provide you with pleasure, but you can see why it is a significant film. Yeah. You can see why it serves its purpose. The same is true here. It's not your favorite of them. I found A Fistful of Dollars a little bit boring. I found For a Few Dollars More a little bit boring. And yet I find this one completely marveling. Like, it blows me away. So that's all personal. That's not a measure of the quality of the films. We can acknowledge that the complexities of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly make it an infinitely more sophisticated film than the previous two.
Oh my goodness, there's no argument there that this is a big, mean, fucking sophisticated film.
Big time. Especially with the inclusion of the Civil War and with all of the attention to detail that Leone brought to this one above and beyond what he brought to for A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More.
He's taken everything that he's learned on the first two because he's done these all back to back.
Well, that is as well.
Yeah, and taken everything that he's learned as a director and as a storyteller and brought it all to bear on this, and it shows in a big bad way.
Mm-hmm. And even just looking at, again, back to the importance of language around film and why we have such a hard time with it, looking at something like A Fistful of Dollars, if you compare that to something like The Searchers and you're looking at this as the godfather of, and I don't mean it's the godfather film of, I mean it is the godfather, the parent of, the proverbial godfather of the spaghetti western genre and modern westerns as they would come to be known. That in and of itself makes A Fistful of Dollars imperative to the genre and imperative to the culture.
Fistful of Dollars or Good, the Bad, and the Ugly?
No, A Fistful of Dollars. And despite the fact that I find it a little bit boring, I can speak of it substantially and in terms of its quality. And in that regard, it is essential to the education around this genre. It's so imperative to the culture. Whether or not I find it boring is irrelevant. That's completely irrelevant. And it's so important for us to get behind and really understand and embrace the language of cinema and the language with which we speak of cinema. Because there is a difference between personal preference and objective quality. And granted, yes, most measures of quality with a subjective medium are in fact subjective. Yep. But that's why you have critics and professionals who are here to be able to look at the nitty-gritty of what makes it stand out. And you have to take it is so important to heed that in terms of, I guess a record keeping of the progression of that culture.
It's being able to be able to break down and say, someone's like, fuck man, I love Terminator 2. Well, what about it did you enjoy? Oh, the gunfights were great, and I love the way the Terminator interacted with John Connor and all that stuff. The film critic or somebody with that knowledge and skill set can come in and go, this is why those relationships worked. Mm-hmm. This is why you like this action scene? Yeah. Did you like it more than that action scene in that other movie? Yeah, it felt better. Here's why these pieces connected better.
Pacing, editing, the writing, the direction.
And there's, I think it's just because the whole discussion, like you said, around film now has become so fucked up. And like Ryan said, how nerd culture has basically just become so toxic and folded in on itself. Mm-hmm. And you can't talk about anything now without being attacked or ripped apart. And you can't even talk about anything. You can't even... Intelligent criticism is attacked and snarky complaining is praised.
Well, Red Letter Media.
I've watched some of The Last Jedi one, and it's just... It's just sad. It's just sad.
Because it's a lot of the same shit.
Well, it's all the same stick. The Plinkett shtick is played out. But
I got to admit, I really have an issue with the lightheartedness with the rape jokes and the abduction stuff. That shit fucking bugs the crap out of me.
They don't.
It's unnecessary.
Yeah, they're not paying attention to taking a pulse of the culture. It's like, no, we've established a character, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So there was a time, like, the prequel reviews were hilarious because they were funny and they were really good criticism.
Yeah, they were very good. Again, it was peppered with a lot of the shit that they really needed to not have ever. But
it's peppered with the shtick that worked when it started, but because it's just driving the same comedy into the ground, and now it's just nitpicky whininess about it, that, yeah, I stopped watching it. I'm like, are you more interested in taking shots at the director, or are you interested in actually breaking down why you think the film didn't work, like you broke down the Star Trek movies and the prequels?
Yeah.
No, you don't seem as interested in doing that. You seem as more interested in taking shots at the film, which is why I stopped watching Half in the Bag in general, because they hate everything.
Yeah.
Everything's stupid, and you're stupid for liking it.
Yeah.
I'm like, nope.
Which just perpetuates a negative culture.
Yeah, not going to play that game. But anyway, no, it's, if you are, because there's been times in cinema where cinema has shifted. You know, you look at the Tarantino indie era of the 90s. That, you know, Tarantino, Rodriguez, all those guys, that
Kevin Smith,
everything that Tarantino does is all rooted in Leone. So much of what Rodriguez did early in his career is rooted in Leone.
Yeah.
You can't look at modern cinema. The modern action hero is rooted in Leone. So much stuff comes out of these three films. That if you didn't have these modern, it's almost a fulcrum point. Something we've talked about this before with stuff like Night of the Living Dead. You know, there's before and there's after.
Exactly.
You know, there's cinema before Sergio Leone westerns.
There's BL and AL.
Yeah. You know, there's before 66 or before 64 and after 66 when it comes to cinema. Because the Leone westerns have a long reach and will continue to have a long reach because they still hold up and people are still taking things from them because they're just so rich and they're made by a dumpy little Italian guy that
really wanted to reinvigorate the Western. That's
I
what
want
it
to
all
make a
comes
Western
down to.
I want to see. And that's what I think the best art comes from, you know, the best bands saying, yeah, we think about the audience, but we made music, we made an album we wanted to hear.
Well, it's interesting because it comes down to representation. Ultimately, it comes down to an issue of representation, not necessarily about, and this applies to representation of gender, representation of race, but more importantly, it's about personal representation. Leone didn't feel that he was being represented in the Westerns that were being created. He liked them. He loved what they were doing, but he still didn't feel like they were reaching their apex. He didn't feel like he was seeing his needs met in what they were and how they were being created. So he took what he knew of the John Ford films, of the John Wayne starrers, and decided, no, this can be better and it should be different. And here's how it should be different. And this is what I want to see. Yeah. So he made what he wanted to see. He created his own representation. And that changed everything.
It changed the world.
It completely changed the world. Yeah. So there's something to be said for representation. This will come up a lot. And it's so, even here, and it comes down to an Italian man. And he didn't feel he was being represented in the films that were being created. So he took charge, made something, and it was the Dollars Trilogy. Like, come on, man. It's insane. It's insane. I would love to do, and I've been thinking about this a lot since I saw it, and this is probably an interesting way to kind of, well, one way to wrap things out a little bit. Drive.
Yes.
I always thought that it was a very Man with No Name film. It kind of struck me as, in itself, a contemporary Leone Western. And I had a very hard time with it at the time when it was released. I have never rewatched it, and I would love to. So I would be interested in maybe doing like a versus with A Fistful of Dollars versus Drive. Is it Drive or Driver? You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, the one with Ryan Phillippe.
No,
Ryan
Gosling. The other Ryan.
Too many Ryans.
Too many Ryans. Too many Chris's.
Too many pretty blonde Ryans and Chris's.
Way too many.
Yeah, well, there's any film that has a silent, violent morally questionable hero is rooted in the West.
Yeah.
And it's rooted in Leone. That's it. Like I'm sure somebody somewhere is going to listen to this and go, actually in Russia in 1939 they made this film. Let's suck cock. Like, whether it's your forte or not. It's just, that's where it comes from. You know, so there's films like, and the guy that made Drive, that's
Rian Johnson.
No, Rian Johnson made Looper. But those guys that did those films are very much acolytes of European cinema.
Nicholas Winding Refn.
Yes.
That's his name. And I think I'm pronouncing it right. Windings. I always think of that.
I remember from day one seeing trailers and posters for Drive, and I'm like, oh, this is such a European film.
Yeah.
It's very European. And if I'm not mistaken, he's in the Dune documentary, Jodorowsky's Dune, talking about hanging out with Jodorowsky and looking at the Dune Bible and all that stuff. And his stuff is very European.
Yeah, you want to talk about stuff that was influenced, shit that influenced everything? Jodorowsky's Dune.
Yeah, which we've talked about on the show. But it's always fun to go back because I don't watch them often. But anytime I do, I'm like, fuck, I gotta watch more spaghetti westerns. Because they're just, I'll show you some of the more down and dirty. Because with any genre, there's your top end and there's, your low end. Yeah. And some of these other westerns are great. Now, it also makes me, I've never seen the original Django, which is supposed to be fantastic. It's supposed to be a hyper-violent version of these.
That might be a really good darts. Eat your darts, Django.
Yeah. Because there's a shitload of them, but Franco Nero and... I can't remember the director's name. Sergio Carbucci, I think, did the original Django. So I think that's who. Yeah. Ariel's just checking it right now. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes, Sergio Carbucci. Yep, I was right. So he only did, and Franco Nero only did a couple of them, but Franco Nero did a ton of westerns.
And my God, is he trying to do his best Eastwood?
Oh, but that's everybody, right?
After Eastwood.
After Eastwood, he set the template, and pretty much every spaghetti western that followed it
was
followed
trying
in that
to
footsteps.
do.
Yeah. Franco Nero went on to be a huge star in these movies because he could do that kind of strong, silent type Clint Eastwood thing.
Yeah.
But no, this was fun. So it was a fun way to start the Western. So we hope you guys dug it, a little long-winded as it was.
Well, let us know also if there's any other Westerns that you'd like us to tackle, any other verses with Westerns that you think might be interesting, like something like Drive versus A Fistful of Dollars. Let us know. Shoot us a message. I've made a decision. I think we're going to start a group so that there's a place for everybody to come and talk and chit-chat, because a friend of mine, Jamie Dew, suggested that might be a really good idea. So you can either shoot us a message or you can join the group. I'm pretty sure it'll have at A Frame Apart Cast as well. So you can find us there. We'll put links to it on our various social media. So
that everyone out there can yakety-yak with each other and not just us.
Exactly. As well as with us. Compare notes, talk about things. I know Ian, etc. will very much enjoy this. And so, I think this will be really good. I think this will be a really nice place for people to congregate. It's not something that we've needed before, but I think now it'll serve a function. So check us out on the various social medias. We will be on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at A Frame Apart Cast. You can email us at aframeapartcast@gmail.com. And you can, of course, also find the show on all major podcasting networks, but specifically, please look us up on iTunes. And no matter what country you're in, wherever you are, write us a little bit of a review. Just 10, 15 words, doesn't take long. Ideally, it would be nice, but anything, and it makes us a little bit more visible. So hopefully at some point, eventually we can rank, because that's the goal, right? Rank and get more people finding the show. So yeah, throw us a bone, man.
Yeah, we'd appreciate that.
Next week,
though,
it's back to school.
It's back to school season. Yeah, so we thought we would have a little unofficial thematic month and talk about some back to school shit, or at least for a couple of weeks.
Yep.
So Ariel, how are we kicking off back to school month?
We're heading back to school next week with a little bit of it's not heady. I think it's appropriate. We will be looking at Inherit the Wind versus To Kill a Mockingbird, discussing the necessity of, logic and reason.
Yeah.
And what better time than now to discuss such a thing?
I would say it's those two films and the desperate cry for reason and sanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And given the climate we live in right now with the United States, and given the bonehead climate we live in Ontario right now.
And potentially in Toronto, let's not forget, Faith Goldie is trying to run for Toronto mayor, folks. Let's not make that happen.
Yeah. Everyone lives in the, well, it won't happen to me. It won't happen in my province, my country, my state, my proctorate, wherever it is you live. But look around.
Now we have Doug Ford.
At a rapid pace.
Yep.
So, he just banned all of the Ontario ministries from using the words global warming in any of their documents. Climate change.
Yep.
So,
No
Ontario fancies themselves pretty smart, and look what you did to us. So, Thank you to everybody that voted blue over a woman.
Or who abstained.
Yeah. Because you don't help when you abstain.
Nope.
So that's what we'll be doing next week. But until then, we want to thank you guys very much for joining us for episode 105, our first sachet.
I didn't even say that before. Western.
I know, you didn't. You totally blew it.
I'm sick.
But until next time, remember, no matter how weird or wacky or Western any of this may seem, every great film and every great idea is just a frame apart.